The call came in the middle of the night, slicing through the thin veil of Will's exhausted sleep like a knife through silk. For a moment, he didn't understand what the voice on the other end was saying. The words blurred together. Accident, critical, emergency surgery. Sign here, please. But then it sank in, and the weight of it pressed down on him with an almost physical force. Luna had been in a car crash. She was being prepped for surgery. The doctors needed his consent to deliver the baby before it was too late. The drive to the hospital was a blur of headlights and fractured thoughts. Will's fingers trembled on the steering wheel, his pulse hammering faster with every red light that refused to turn green. His mind replayed every bitter argument, every hateful thing he had ever said to Luna in the weeks leading up to this. The memory of her last expression, defiant, wounded, trying to hide her fear, came back to haunt him like a ghost that refused to rest. Somewhere in his chest, guilt was already beginning to dig its claws deep, whispering that he had pushed her too far, that if he had answered her call earlier that day, maybe she wouldn't have been out there alone. The hospital lights were blindingly white, the corridors too clean, too silent, too sterile for what he felt inside. The nurse handed him a clipboard with trembling hands, and he signed without reading, his signature jagged and barely legible. It didn't matter what the words said. He would have agreed to anything if it meant she and the baby had a chance to live. When the doors of the operating room closed, he stood in the hallway like a man exiled from his own life, unable to breathe, unable to think. Time stretched. Minutes bled into hours. Then a doctor appeared, face weary beneath his mask, eyes soft with something close to pity. "The baby's alive," the doctor said quietly. "We managed to get him out just in time." "But Luna," he hesitated. The pause felt like eternity. "She suffered significant head trauma. She's stable for now, but she's in a coma. We'll have to wait and see if she wakes." Will's knees nearly gave out beneath him. The hallway spun. He clung to the wall, to anything solid enough to keep him from collapsing completely. Alive. Coma. The words didn't belong in the same sentence. He wanted to feel relief for the child, but it was drowned beneath the rising tide of horror at what Luna's condition meant. He forced himself to walk, step by slow, staggering step, until he reached the neonatal ward. Behind the glass, in a small incubator surrounded by soft blue light, lay a child so tiny and fragile it didn't seem real. Tubes and wires traced delicate paths across the infant's skin, connecting him to life. Will pressed his palm against the glass, his reflection ghostly beside the baby's face. His heart clenched. That was his son. A life born out of chaos, out of a night filled with screams and metal and blood. The nurse told him the baby was breathing on his own. "He's strong," she said softly, as if offering him something to hold on to. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to believe that strength ran in the blood. But as he turned toward Luna's room, the sight that greeted him threatened to shatter him completely. She lay there motionless, her face pale and bruised, dark hair matted with dried blood against the pillow. Machines beeped rhythmically, counting out the fragile rhythm of her survival. Her body, once radiant and full of restless energy, was now still, wrapped in white sheets like a fallen angel. Will sat beside her and tried to speak, but no words came. There was only the rasp of his own breath and the endless hum of machines. He reached for her hand, cold but still there, and a wave of memories crashed over him. The first time they met, the way she laughed too loudly, the night she told him she was pregnant and he refused to believe her. Shame burned through him now, hotter than fire. He had doubted her. He had called her a liar, said cruel things, accused her of manipulation. And yet here she was, fighting for the very life that now connected them forever. He stayed through the night, not moving, not speaking. The doctors came and went. The world outside the hospital continued as usual, dawn breaking, cars starting, people living. But inside that room, time was frozen. Will's thoughts became a maze of regret and disbelief. Every moment of anger now seemed absurd in the face of her fragility. Every harsh word he had thrown at her was an echo bouncing endlessly inside his head. When morning came, the first light touched her face, softening the bruises, giving her an almost ethereal glow. He whispered her name then, barely audible, as if afraid to wake her from something deeper than sleep. He promised her and himself that he would be there when she woke, that he would care for their child, that he would undo the harm he had done. It wasn't penance, it was survival. Days passed. The baby gained strength, his cries faint but determined. Will began spending hours between the two rooms, one filled with new life, the other suspended between life and loss. Nurses began to recognize him, nodding gently when he arrived. They told him Luna's condition was unchanged. "She's holding on," one nurse said, "and sometimes that's the hardest thing to do." At night, he would sit beside the incubator, whispering stories about his mother to the child who couldn't yet hear him. He told him that she was brave, that she had fought for him before he even entered the world. He said she was more than her mistakes, more than the pain that had followed her like a shadow. He told the baby that she was worth waiting for. But beneath the tenderness, fear was growing. The doctors had begun to speak in careful tones about possible outcomes: brain trauma, memory loss, the chance that even if she woke, she might not remember him, or the baby, or any of it. The thought tore something vital inside him. How could he face her if she looked at him as a stranger? How could he bear it if she never forgave him, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't remember the life they had destroyed together? Each evening he called Electra, his current partner, to assure her that he was fine. But the conversations were strained, fragile things built on silence. Electra didn't ask too many questions at first, but as the days stretched on, her patience frayed. "You're not really here anymore, are you?" she had said once, her voice tight with resentment. He didn't answer because there was no answer that would sound honest. His body might have been present in the apartment they shared, but his heart, his guilt, his fears, his entire sense of self, was still in that hospital room. He began to notice small changes in himself: how he'd stop eating halfway through a meal, how the sound of a siren made his pulse quicken, how sleep no longer brought rest but endless dreams of Luna's face vanishing into darkness. When the baby was finally strong enough to leave the incubator, he held him for the first time. The child's warmth against his chest felt like both a blessing and a punishment. He realized then that this tiny being had survived when Luna might not, and the unfairness of that truth was unbearable. As weeks turned to months, Luna's condition remained the same, alive, but distant, trapped somewhere unreachable. The doctor's updates grew shorter. They spoke now of managing expectations. But Will refused to let go. Every day he read to her from the books she loved, hoping the rhythm of his voice might find its way into whatever dreams she was having. Every night, he played recordings of their favorite songs, the ones they used to dance to when life had been simple. Then, one afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the blinds, he thought he saw her fingers twitch. It was so slight that he doubted his own perception. But the machines reacted, a small spike, a flicker of something. The nurse confirmed it, a response. Hope, fragile but real, surged through him. He leaned closer, whispering her name again and again, begging her to return. In the following days, there were more signs. Her eyelids fluttered. Her breathing grew steadier. The doctors smiled cautiously, saying she might wake soon. Will's heart soared, but the fear returned with it. If she woke with no memory, if she looked at him with confusion or dread, could he bear it? Would she still see him as the man who once loved her, or only as the reason she had nearly died? The night before the doctor's plan to reduce her sedation, Will stood by her bed and stared at her face for a long time. He imagined what it would be like if she opened her eyes and didn't know him. He imagined introducing himself to her again, not as the man from her past, but as someone willing to rebuild everything from ashes. He wanted to believe redemption was possible. He wanted to believe love could outlast even memory. When morning came, Luna stirred. Her lashes trembled, and slowly, painfully, her eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, searching the ceiling, the light, the shapes moving around her. Will's breath caught in his throat. He said her name, voice cracking with emotion. She turned toward him, blinking. For one heartbeat, he thought he saw recognition, a spark of something familiar. But then her gaze drifted past him, blank, lost. She whispered something he couldn't understand. The doctor leaned in, asking simple questions, her name, the date, where she was. She struggled, her words disjointed, her confusion raw. The verdict came swiftly, partial amnesia, consistent with her injury. She might recover some memories over time, or she might never remember certain parts of her life. The weight of that reality hit Will harder than he expected. He left the room for a moment, gripping the hallway rail to steady himself. It felt like losing her all over again, not to death, but to the void where their shared life used to be. And yet, when he looked back through the window and saw her trying to move her lips, trying to make sense of her surroundings, something inside him softened. She was still here. She was alive. That had to be enough. Over the following days, he stayed by her side as she relearned fragments of her world. She didn't remember their fights. She didn't remember the betrayal that had broken them. She didn't remember the night she said she never wanted to see him again. In a strange, cruel way, the accident had given them a clean slate. But it was a slate written in grief, not innocence. He introduced her to their son, gently, carefully. The baby gurgled in her arms, eyes wide and curious. For a fleeting second, Will thought he saw something shift in her expression, a faint, instinctive connection that transcended memory. A mother's recognition, primal and wordless. She wept then, silently, holding the child as if afraid he might vanish if she let go. Electra called again that evening. Her voice was sharp, wounded. She had seen the photos online, the press coverage of Will leaving the hospital with the newborn, the whispers that he was staying with Luna full-time. "So that's it," she said. "You're choosing her?" Will didn't respond. In truth, the choice had already been made the night Luna almost died. Whatever they had, whatever future he might have imagined with Electra, it paled beside the fragile miracle sleeping in the next room. Still, guilt gnawed at him. Not the guilt of betrayal this time, but the guilt of surviving, of being given a second chance he wasn't sure he deserved. Each day, he helped Luna walk again, fed her, read to her, reminded her of the small things she couldn't recall, the songs she liked, the foods she hated, the dreams she once confessed in the dark. Slowly, she began to smile more, though the light in her eyes remained distant, like someone looking through fog at a life she couldn't quite touch. Sometimes she asked about the accident. He never told her the full story, not yet. He couldn't bring himself to say that she had been running from him, from their argument, from the wreckage of their relationship. He wanted to protect her from that pain until she was strong enough to face it. Maybe one day, he would tell her everything. Maybe by then, she would understand. Weeks turned into months. Luna's progress amazed everyone. The doctors began to speak of discharge plans, of home care, of physical therapy. But the real healing was quieter, the slow mending of trust between two broken souls. Will found himself laughing again, sometimes even believing that they might have a future not defined by tragedy. Yet there were nights when he lay awake beside her, haunted by what might still come. What if her memories returned suddenly, violently? What if she remembered the betrayal, the anger, the pain, and couldn't forgive him? What if this fragile peace was just a pause before another storm? He didn't have the answers. All he knew was that every time he saw her reach for their child, every time she smiled without understanding why, something inside him felt lighter. Redemption, he realized, wasn't a single act or apology. It was a daily choice, to stay, to try, to love even when the past refused to let go. As winter melted into spring, the hospital room that had once been filled with fear now echoed with soft laughter and the cries of new life. Luna still struggled with gaps in her memory, but she began writing in a journal, her way of rebuilding the self she had lost. Sometimes she asked Will to help fill in the blanks. He would tell her stories, careful ones, edited for hope. He never lied, but he also never reminded her of the moments that had nearly destroyed them. Not yet. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the world outside turned gold, she turned to him and said quietly, "It feels like I know you." Her hand brushed his, tentative but warm. He smiled, tears welling up. "Maybe," he whispered, "you always have." And in that fragile, luminous moment, surrounded by the hum of monitors and the soft breathing of their child, we'll realize that sometimes love survives not because it remembers, but because it refuses to die, even when everything else is lost.